IQPs or isolated queen pawns can come from a myriad of different opening variations. They are extremely common, ranging from the Sicilian Alapin, the Caro Can, and even the Queen's Gambit decline exchange variation. The IQP pops up almost everywhere, so it is very important to know how to play with and against an IQP, which is exactly what this video is about. Let's begin. First, a small introduction. An isolated queen's pawn is a pawn on the semi-open D file which has no allied pawns on either adjacent file. It is called isolated because it cannot be protected by another pawn, except in the case of a pawn capturing onto the C or E files. The general advantage of having an IQP is the space advantage, as you have a pawn in the center while your opponent does not. The general drawback is the positional weakness, which can be exploited in the endgame. Now, I don't mean to say that all positions with an IQP are worse for the side with the weakness. It can also be viewed as a strength in many positions. It all depends on the specifics of that certain position. Coming up are a few principles regarding the play when you have the isolated queen's pawn, followed by the principles when you are playing against the IQP. So first we're going to look at how to play with the IQP. So the first principle or bit of advice is try to advance your IQP and exchange it for an enemy pawn. This rule is pretty straightforward. You trade your weakness for an opponent pawn, thereby getting rid of it. The tricky part is engineering and timing the push. If you do it too early, it might backfire, as the sudden opening of the positions can lead to very sharp tactical play, which you must consider before the push. Even if you can't exchange the pawn, still pushing it ahead will give you even further space and cramp your opponent's pieces, thereby increasing your overall chances for success. Generally, you should only push after having completed all your development, so that the opponent doesn't get the initiative in the upcoming open game. Move wisely though, as pawns can't move backwards. Principle 2. Refrain from exchanging pieces. If you have a positional or a static weakness, you should obviously try to keep the game in the middle game, as more pieces will help utilize the space advantage that you have and help create threats to the opponent while cramping their pieces. Of course, you shouldn't refrain from all kind of trades. Some are even good for you. Just don't go on a trading rampage and simplify too much, especially the minor pieces. As we will see later in this video, the goal of the side playing against the IQP is to trade off all the minor pieces and then win in the major piece endgame. So refrain from trades, especially minor pieces, unless it benefits you. Principle 3. Play active and develop quickly. If you have the IQP, your best shot at victory is an attack on the king or any similar aggressive plan. Also, due to the lack of space, your opponent will find it more difficult to bring their pieces into the game. So you should take advantage of these facts and develop with a sense of urgency. Even in the middle game, try not to succumb to passivity, as it only reduces the pressure on your opponent and makes their task of simplifying much easier. So, play actively and keep your opponents on their feet. That will increase your chances for success greatly, as since you have more pieces, it will be easier for you to exploit the space advantage while the opponent will feel cramped because he has so many pieces. Now, let's look at how to play against the IQP. So principle 1 of playing against the IQP is try to trade pieces, especially minor pieces. By trading the minor pieces, which are the knights and bishops, we get rid of all complications and can deploy a simple strategy to win the IQP as follows. Line up your heavy pieces on the D file attacking the IQP. Once your opponent has set up a defense, use your pawn on the C or E file to put further pressure on the IQP, and due to the pin on his IQP, he will not be able to capture your pawn and thereby you will win the pawn. Now you might ask, well, why do we need to keep all the major pieces on the board? Won't two rooks also do the job? The answer is, in some cases, yes. But by keeping the queens on the board, we prevent any ideas of the opponent using their king to defend the IQP. Since a major piece endgame is not exactly an endgame because all the heavy pieces are still on the board, the king will be unsafe in the open, hence we try to keep the queens as well. If there are only 2 rooks versus 2 rooks in an IQP position, there may be a chance that the opponent may deploy his king as a third defense to the IQP, and it will be very difficult for you to make progress from there. Of course, this is an ideal situation and it is possible to win in other scenarios as well. Trading should be done carefully, however, as if you allow a trade where they get to support their IQP with a pawn, then that can't be good. For example, if the white IQP is on d4, generally avoid trading on e3 or c3, as those trades help support the IQP and give the opponent an easier game. Principle number 2. Blockade the pawn. Don't allow it to advance. So you see a pattern that whatever the rules we mentioned in playing with the IQP, some of these rules are exactly the opposite, and that makes sense because now we are playing against the IQP. If the IQP is allowed to run loose, it can create serious problems. Therefore, an ideal scenario is to occupy the outpost in front of the pawn with a knight and reinforce it in such a way that you never have to take back with the pawn. Or else the file will be closed and it will become anybody's game since you cannot attack the IQP as easily. Obviously, depending on the circumstances, this isn't always possible, nor is it always correct. The general idea is to prevent the advance of the d pawn to the extent possible, as advancing the d pawn usually, and I say usually because there are some exceptions, advancing the d pawn usually gives the side with the IQP an advantage, as his pieces will generally be more active due to the extra space, and therefore opening up the position should favor him in most scenarios. The point of this principle is to try to dissuade your opponent from carrying out this advance. Principle number 3. Concentrate your attack on the pawn. This will lead to the opponent being tied down to the defense of the pawn, and thus he will be able to create lesser threats to distract you, therefore making your task of simplifying much easier. Of course, this is a game of patience and you have to keep your position solid, make minor improvements here and there, suppress counterplay and try to trade pieces in a favorable circumstance. Normally, the opponent delegates the job of defending the IQP to a minor piece and creates threats with the remaining pieces. This is why we try to exchange them off and force the big guns to passively defend their pawn. In conclusion, positions with an IQP are very double-edged, with both sides bent on accomplishing the goals and principles mentioned. It is, however, to be noted that an IQP position is not strictly better for either side. It depends much on the specifics of the position, and you have to know when to break the rules. All in all, follow the given principles and you will have much better chances playing with or against an IQP. Well, that's it for today, friends. Please make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already so that I can keep making more content like this. Until then, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.